Hi everyone, Carmen here. Thank you for tuning in once again. Today we're going to talk about something that can really impact how you do financially as an adult, but seems to be something that everyone needs. What is this? Transportation. So I happen to live in a city that's very spread out. Where I live, it would be very difficult to take public transit to and from work. If I was to do that, it might make a 20-minute commute, increase it somewhere up to an hour, hour and a half each way. And even when I was working at my first job, the location of where I worked and the hours I worked were not conducive to public transportation. It just wasn't an option for the location where I was in the city. So I bought myself a car so I could get to and from work and later on to and from school at the time. So what I ended up buying was I bought a slightly used 2003 Honda Civic SI in 2005. And it turns out this car would be absolutely life-changing and would become my $100,000 Honda Civic. So you wonder how that may happen. So I bought the car when I was at my very first career job out of school, and I had the older kind of beater car up until then that eventually died and stopped working. It was also a Honda Civic hatchback in 1990 and had more than 400,000 kilometers on it. So that right there led to a little bit of brand loyalty for Honda. So when I had the opportunity to buy a Honda Civic that had been slightly used for a year and a half, I didn't take the initial hit on that depreciation you'll see when it first comes off the lot, and I was able to buy it for a reasonable amount at the time. I ended up spending $17,000 on this little red, sporty Honda Civic SI coupe. So that coupe got me to and from work. It became a really good, reliable car, took me on road trips and whatnot. And because at the time I did accelerated biweekly payments on the car, it cost me $350 a month for 4.5 years, and then it was paid off. But once that car was paid off, that's when it really became worth a ton of value to me. So once it was paid off, I decided I wanted to buy my first property. And one way I'd be able to do that is if I didn't have car payments. So even though the car is 5 years old, I decided I'm keeping this thing. It only costs me gas, maintenance, and insurance and registration to drive it. So it seems like a really good idea to keep this car now that I don't have car payments. So what I was able to do, instead of having money going to car payments, I bought my very first condo, which was a very big purchase at the time. It really made me feel grown up, and I had my own place for the first time ever. Fast forward a few years, I lived at that condo for 5 years. In the meantime, I met my husband, so a one-bedroom condo no longer worked for the two of us. So I sold it, and due to the timing and my purchase price, I was able to make a little bit of profit off that condo, which was the reason I was able to buy it, was because I didn't have car payments. So later on, I took that investment from the condo, put in the stock market, got a little bit lucky with what I bought, and was able to double it, which is one of the things that contributed to the Civic eventually being a $100,000 car. The other way it became this $100,000 car to me was over its lifetime, it cost me $17,000 to buy it. Sure, there was maintenance along the way, but I got really lucky. So my husband, when we started dating, he was working in the automotive industry. And that was about when the car was getting to the point where it needed some of the bigger maintenance things done. So he was able to get the parts at cost for me and did all the labor for me, which was absolutely phenomenal. And that's what let me keep this car for so long. So that was one of the ways I was able to save money off of it. But the other thing is, so for the next 11 years, I didn't have to make a payment on that car. So if you factor in, say we went and bought a car in the $20,000 to $30,000 price range, our average payments would be, say, $450 a month. So if I was to go invest that $450 a month, that would be approximately, I don't know, about, say, $5,000 a year would be put into an investment account. And say that investment account was getting a 4% interest rate. Over the course of 11 years, that $450 a month you're putting away into investments instead of spending on a car becomes just over $75,000. So that's another way I figure this car became my $100,000 Civic. The other factor that comes in too, say I bought a new car every 5 years, which is what a lot of people do. And I can see why. There's a lot of allure to driving a brand new car, and it's pretty exciting having a new car with all the new features. But then on the flip side, say you were buying that car in that around the $30,000 range. Over the course of 11 years, I would have spent another $60,000 on cars, which I wouldn't have had to invest. So between putting the money into the investments and not spending the money, the total value of that's close to $135,000 for something so simple as keeping an old car. And the thing is, because it was a Honda, it lasted well. Like even till the end, it was still a good little car. Yeah, it didn't have a ton of power and you always had to make sure to check the oil, but overall it was still a nice car to drive. So you may wonder why I finally ended up getting rid of the car. So what had happened was, it was getting to the point where I felt a little bit bad for my husband having to drive my older car while I upgraded to a newer car a couple of years ago. So then this September I went on this kick. I don't know why, but I decided we absolutely should buy a new car this September. And the way it started out was I was browsing on social media one night and I saw this ad for a Chevy Spark for $9,999. And I was like, wow, it's a car under $10,000. I was like, maybe we should go do this. Then we can have a brand new car that doesn't cost us very much each month. And then my husband has a brand new car to drive, which would be super awesome. So my husband, who had worked at a car dealership at one point in time, he told me this car was a unicorn. If we went into the car dealership, it wasn't going to exist. And I was like, no way. They have it on the site and it shows up on a couple of the different sites for the different dealerships. This car totally exists. So we go into the dealership and ask to test drive this car. Turns out the car is a unicorn. It was a 2020 car, and then when we got there, they told us there's no 2020s left and only the 2021s. So by the time we factored everything into this car, it was a $15,000 Chevy Spark, which are like, for the type of car it is, that's not exactly what we want to spend money on. So we're like, okay, we'll keep looking. And then staying in that same price range, we're like, oh, maybe we'll go look at a Mitsubishi Mirage because that's a good little car too. So we go across to the dealership, but the dealership was closed early because of COVID. So we were both still working during COVID, so it's hard to go to a dealership during the day if we're both working during the day. So we're like, okay, scrap that. And we're about to leave. And the other dealership that's right across the road is the Honda dealership. So spur of the moment, I go to my husband, maybe we should just go test drive another Civic, just to see what we think. So after being in the Spark, the Civic seemed like a significant upgrade. So we go test drive it and go home and we're like, you know what? We're gonna totally get a Civic this week. Just don't know which one. If we want to go with the base model, the touring model, or the SI model. So we'll line up another visit to the dealership later this week and go test drive all three. So we ended up doing that and we ended up getting a new car. So the old car was getting retired and we were gonna go sell it. So we had it parked in front of our house and we just had to go wash it up on a Saturday and go get it washed, post some pictures, and get it posted to sell so someone else could have this car for a little bit. But what had happened was the weekend we were going to take the pictures was this first snowfall of the year. And where we live, the first snowfall of the year can be really slippery because there isn't really any salt on the roads yet and people are getting used to driving in the snow. And we happen to live at the start of the neighborhood, which means everybody goes in and out on the corner in front of our house and it can get really, really icy. So my husband went out to go wash the car and he gets home and he goes, well, I don't think we're going to be able to sell the car. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, someone totally hit and ran it last night. They hit the back bumper and the back bumper is all torn off, as you can see by this photo. So I was like, okay, that kind of sucks. So I went into the police station to report it just so we had paperwork as to why the car had the damage it had. And at that point, we're like, okay, we'll see what we end up doing with it. And this was on a Saturday evening. So we go to bed Saturday night and 6 a.m. Sunday, my phone rings. Someone was calling me on a Sunday morning and it was a local number. So I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, don't know who's calling, but I'll pick it up to be sure. And they go, oh, this is the local police calling. And the reason we're calling is someone hit your car at 11 o'clock last night. I was like, 11 o'clock Saturday night? And they're like, yes, 11 o'clock Saturday night. I was like, oh, it must have got hit again. They go, well, the man left a note with his name and number, but here's his name and number as well. And because of the damage to his car, you're going to have to come report this one as well. So it's like, oh, okay. And it ended up being the same police officer that I'd spoken with the night before. And she was like super awesome to deal with. So I ended up going and reporting that. And the second driver had hit a different part of the car. They hit the front of the car instead of the back of the car and had done some damage there. So what we ended up doing was we ended up going through their insurance, and they ended up writing off my little car that had been my little car that could for 17 years. So it was a little sad seeing it be towed away and kind of bumping along the ground after all the good memories it made and the difference it made for me financially over the course of my life. Like, keeping that little car made a significant difference with where I was at age 25 versus age 35. So it was a really good life lesson I learned by reading some of the financial blogs and books I'd read as I was coming up. And they'd always talked about how your car choice can really impact how you do financially. But it was really over the course of owning the Civic, I got to really live it and find out the difference your car choice can make, and how, even though at times near the end I started to feel like I would like a new car with all the new features like remote start, heated seats, and auxiliary inputs. You could actually tie your phone into your speaker system and stereo in the car, but we kind of kept it going, and overall it was really worthwhile, and at the end it ended up being sad to see it go. So thank you once again for tuning in, and I look forward to having you join for the next video I share.